Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day. It's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. No one prepares you for the dissonance of feeling dread in a consecrated space. Sanctuaries, I'd always imagined, were reservoirs of calm, yet the instant my foot crossed the threshold of that particular confession booth, a knot tightened deep in my gut. An aberrant whisper reached me from within, the sound of an exhalation, painstakingly slow, tremulous. I recoiled, my gaze fixed on the narrow aperture. Above, the tarnished glow of a chandelier spilled weakly onto the time-worn wood grain. The booth possessed the aura of abandonment. Mr. Silas, the groundskeeper, had assured me it hadn't seen use in decades. Still, the certainty prickled my skin. I was not alone in its suffocating confines. My Tuesdays and Thursdays are spent volunteering within the venerable walls of this century-old church. My designated task involves wrestling order from the chaos of the archives housed in cardboard sarcophagi near the rear passage. Within lie brittle letters, minutes from long-disbanded councils, sacramental ledgers, ephemera layered in dust within tired cabinets. Handling these fragile vestiges requires a delicate touch. I catalog each piece meticulously, logging its existence. The church staff, blessedly, grant me solitude, a preference, as I detest the sensation of being observed. Besides, the subterranean office maintains a consistent coolness, a haven from the seasonal extremes that might otherwise splinter my concentration. On that specific evening, time had slipped its leash, and I found myself lingering past my usual departure. An elderly congregant had mentioned the possibility of misplaced records within a storage alcove adjacent to the confessionals. Curiosity piqued, I ventured forth. The main nave lay steeped in silence, my own footfalls echoing unnervingly against the vaulted ceiling. Overhead, luminaries stuttered, casting the corridor in a capricious, uneven light. Mr. Silas had mentioned locking up at 9, but his courtesy was unwavering. He never hurried me, affording me the latitude to proceed at my own pace. The archaic confessional occupied the chapel's leftward recess, a sentinel of dark wood marked by a diminutive door and a curtain bleached by years. I recall navigating a treacherous floor tile near its entrance, loose and rocking slightly underfoot. Mr. Silas had once recounted the tale of the priest who presided over this booth, his passing long ago sealing its fate. Subsequently, a newer confessional had been erected on the opposing side, nearer the altar. This elder sibling remained derelict. Whispers circulated. Some cited structural decay, others a peculiar miasma clinging to it. Until that night, I had perceived nothing amiss. Drawing near, my hand instinctively reached for the handle. It was then the sound manifested. Not a whisper this time, but a faint whimper, the muffled sob of someone pressing sorrow into their palms. I froze, inclining my head, straining my ear against the unyielding wood. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Darkness pooled within the booth. The faded curtain betrayed no hint of motion. "Is anyone there?" I breathed into the stillness. Silence answered. A final, almost imperceptible sigh brushed my ear. or perhaps it was merely the echo of my own strained nerves. Swallowing the tremor in my throat, I eased the door open. The interior revealed twin benches flanking a slender partition, its surface pierced by a metal grill, the conduit for whispered sins and priestly counsel. The air hung thick with the scent of mildew and antiquated varnish. A tentative sweep of my hand across the bench yielded a fine patina of dust. Empty. My eyes darted to the shadowed corners, but the space was meager, offering no refuge for concealment. A wave of foolishness washed over me for succumbing to such theatrics. Yet I lingered, trying to dispel the lingering disquiet. That's when my gaze snagged on it, a folded slip of parchment wedged behind the metal lattice. Gently, I coaxed it free, the fragile paper tearing slightly under my touch. It felt brittle, ancient. Unfolding it revealed handwritten script in faded ink, a cursive, elegant yet difficult to decipher. Fragments emerged. This burden I carry, and of this I cannot speak aloud. An unease settled deeper within me. A date, decades past, resided in the corner. The author alluded to feeling ensnared by the church's silence, yet the nature of that silence remained shrouded. Clutching the paper, I refolded it, resolving to present it to Mr. Silas before departing. Just then, a subtle noise emanated from the partition's far side. Faint, like the rustle of knees shifting on a kneeler. A swift glance confirmed the emptiness. A sudden craving for open air constricted my chest. I secured the booth's door as best I could and hastened toward the main entrance. Mr. Silas stood sentinel by the massive oak doors, awaiting my egress. He inquired if all was well. I offered only a curt nod, unwilling to voice my experience, to appear unnerved by an unoccupied box. That night, the confessional infiltrated my dreams. The metal grill loomed, and from the obscurity beyond, faint sobbing reached me. I awoke near 3, drenched in a cold sweat, heart pounding, throat parched. Fetching water, I attempted to rationalize the experience, to relegate it to the realm of overwrought imagination. But an insistent intuition whispered otherwise, urging a return. A need for answers, for more fragments of paper, perhaps, began to germinate. The thought clung stubbornly throughout the following morning. The next afternoon, I arrived at the church ahead of schedule. After a perfunctory greeting to the receptionist, I made a direct course for the time-worn booth. An immediate anomaly registered. The door hung slightly ajar, though my memory insisted I had pulled it shut. Perhaps Mr. Silas had investigated. I suppressed the urge to speculate, yet a jolt resonated in my stomach as I approached. The corridor exuded a damp, lithic scent. Ancient pews groaned under the slightest contact. Stepping back inside the confessional, I observed that the dust coating the bench seemed disturbed, as if someone had recently occupied the space. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. Running my hand over the wooden surface revealed a distinct, clear impression, a palm print. My breath hitched. My mouth felt like parchment. I stood immobile, listening intently. From behind the grill, that faint sound resurfaced. A soft, wavering exhalation, the sound of someone struggling for voice yet holding back. I leaned closer, pressing my ear near the small perforations. The frantic pulse in my ears drowned out all else. "Is someone there?" I whispered. Silence. Then my eyes caught another folded paper tucked beneath the bench's edge. I retrieved it. The script matched the first. This missive spoke of guilt, of the church's complicity in concealment, of an admission of fault perpetually withheld. The writer yearned for absolution, unattainable, they claimed, without revealing the full truth. The note terminated abruptly, mid-thought, unsigned. I exited the booth, tension coiling in my muscles, my hands trembling. The door creaked softly as I closed it. I presented this second paper to Mr. Silas. He maintained he hadn't touched the booth in years, insisting no one else would have ventured inside. His gaze turned curious, probing. "Are you certain about this?" he inquired. I displayed the paper. He merely shrugged, suggesting he might query the priest about archaic confessions stored away. I withheld the auditory phenomena, reluctant to sound irrational. Over the ensuing week, the booth exerted a magnetic pull. Each passage past its door sent a shiver tracing my spine. One evening, I resolved to remain after hours, alone, determined to unravel the enigma. Mr. Silas, obliging as ever, locked the main doors but entrusted me with a key for my exit, asking no questions. Silence reigned in the cavernous chapel. Guided by my phone's beam, I navigated the periphery of the pews, attuned to any deviation from the quietude. As I finally neared the confessional, the faint, nostalgic aroma of cold incense touched the air. The door was shut. My pulse accelerated. Carefully, I opened it, slipped inside, and pulled it closed behind me, plunging myself into near-total darkness. Allowing my vision to adapt, I settled onto the bench. The wood protested under my weight. My palms grew damp. I stared fixedly at the metal grill, half expecting a visage to materialize from the void. Nothing but impenetrable shadow greeted me. Yet a subtle shuffle persisted, like fabric dragged across the floorboards. "I don't know who you are," I began, striving for a calm cadence, "but I'm here. I can listen." My heart thudded violently. For an instant, I fancied I heard a whisper. Leaning forward, every muscle taut, a chill traced the nape of my neck. I opened my mouth to speak again, but utterance failed me. Then, that faint exhalation returned, so tenuous I questioned my own senses. "I'm here," I repeated, my voice strained. "I can help." My chest felt constricted. My breaths came shallow and fast. Moments later, something slid beneath the partition from the other side. Another sheet of yellowed paper, folded neatly. My hand shook as I retrieved it. Illuminating it with my phone, the text spoke of betrayal, of conspiracies woven into the church's fabric, and pleaded for forgiveness. The author confessed the church had suppressed evidence of transgressions affecting numerous lives. The script vibrated with fury and regret. The writer bore the weight of their own silence. It concluded with the familiar refrain, "I seek absolution, but no one will grant it." A glacial cold seeped into my hands. I clutched the paper, my thoughts chaotic. "I don't know what transpired," I said aloud, my voice fracturing. "I'm not clergy. I cannot absolve anything." A profound silence descended, heavy and absolute. I pushed myself upright, bracing against the booth's confining wall, my knees threatening to buckle. Pushing the door open, I stumbled out, heart hammering against my ribs until my chest ached. My eyes swept the dimly lit chapel, empty. I drew a ragged breath, forcing my legs to move. I locked the booth door behind me. The subsequent days saw me immersed in my archival duties, a forced attempt at normalcy. Hours spent sorting brittle documents offered little respite. The notes, the pervasive presence, consumed my thoughts. Sleep became elusive, punctuated by nightmares of the metal grill and a muffled voice invoking my name. I'd jolt awake, slick with sweat. My appetite waned. Colleagues remarked on my pallor. I deflected their concern with vague assurances. Inevitably, curiosity gnawed through my resolve. Gathering the collected notes, I spread them across a table in the basement office, comparing the handwriting. Uniform. I tried piecing together a chronology from the scattered dates, spanning roughly 50 to 30 years prior. Recurring phrases echoed, "hidden truth," "the church refuses to acknowledge," "I cannot say more." The narrative hinted at a confession tied to a cover-up, its specifics perpetually veiled. The notion of approach in the current priest surfaced, but hesitation held me back. How would they react? Was I trespassing on sacred, sorrowful ground? Yet, the entity in the booth had seemingly chosen me, fixated upon me. Mr. Silas continued to dismiss the sounds with pragmatic explanations. Settling timbers, wind whistling through ancient masonry. I tried to embrace his logic, but the tangible papers, materializing with unnerving regularity, defied rationalization. One late afternoon, I felt the inexorable pull again. The church was largely deserted, save for the distant ethereal strains of choir practice drifting down a hallway. I walked directly to the old booth and slid inside, this time leaving the door slightly ajar, a concession to my rising claustrophobia. I placed a small torch on my lap. The bench felt colder than before. I consciously regulated my breathing. After several minutes, the soft shuffling recommenced. My muscles seized, my jaw clenched. "I'm listening," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "I have the papers. I've read what you wrote." I leaned towards the grill. The partition remained an opaque barrier. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me violently. I ignored it, unwilling to break the fragile tension. The shuffling intensified. I sensed movement, presence, just beyond sight. No form emerged, only darkness. My heart galloped. Sweat beaded on my temples. My fingertips tingled. A quiet exhale filtered through the grill, laden with desperation, the sound of intent struggling against incapacity. "You need to tell me what happened," I urged again, my own pulse roaring in my ears. My stomach churned. I braced myself, anticipating a voice, but none came. Instead, a final piece of paper slid onto my side. Thicker this time, densely inscribed. "I cannot face judgment from those who remain silent about their own guilt," it read. "I came to speak the truth, but the church ignored me. They commanded silence." I scanned the note twice, my hands trembling so violently the paper rustled. My breathing grew shallow. I could almost visualize the figure opposite, hunched, head bowed, wrestling with unspeakable words. Peering through the grill yielded nothing. Then, footsteps echoed in the corridor. A choir member passed. The sound jolted me. Dusk had fallen outside. A sudden vulnerability washed over me. Nausea surged. I scrambled to my feet, stuffing the note into my pocket. "I can't help you," I whispered hoarsely. "I don't know what to do." I waited, listening for a response that never arrived. Only silence. I backed out of the booth, pulled the door closed, and walked away, limbs leaden, head swimming. Reaching the side entrance, I fumbled with the keys. Once outside, I gasped. The cool evening air a shock against my fevered skin. I stood there, heart pounding, grappling with the encounter. It felt as though someone sought absolution from me, a mere volunteer, for a sin the institution itself had buried. I possessed no authority, no power. 2 days have passed since I last approached that confessional. Avoidance has become my strategy, yet the notes haunt my waking thoughts, whispering of secrets immured within these hallowed walls, of a persistent guilt tethered to the writer. Spirit or projection, I cannot say, but the sighs were real. The papers are tangible. That cannot be dismissed. A conviction takes root. Some residue of pain lingers, trapped within that confined space. Proof eludes me, but the memory of that muffled, struggling voice remains vivid. All I know is that something waits there still, yearning to confess, seeking absolution for a transgression never acknowledged. I oscillate between the urge to probe deeper and the instinct to flee. For now, I exist in the uneasy interstice, caught within the web of this old building's secrets. My hands tremble at the thought, and my gaze invariably drifts towards the confessional doors whenever I pass. Something within that ancient wood calls to me, and while I doubt my strength to continue listening, I fear I may lack the will to stop. The dust of the long gravel artery clung to me, a gritty film coating my throat, as I stepped onto the grounds of the derelict Willow Creek acreage that humid afternoon. Clipboard in one fist, a roll of blueprints clutched in the other, my shirt was already a damp second skin. My vision was clear. Resurrect these collapsing barns, these forgotten sheds, into a vibrant sanctuary for culture. Workshops breathing life into hollow spaces, galleries gleaming where shadows now pooled, plazas humming with artists' discourse. My thoughts were anchored to the tangible, load-bearing walls, roof integrity, the intricate webs of wiring. Folklore held no currency for me. Strange tales were merely static. Yet, from the first breath of that heavy air, a dissonance hummed beneath the surface. Crossing the main yard, its weeds brittle underfoot, I registered faint scuffles from the largest barn, a cavernous structure sighing under the weight of neglect. An errant rodent, I assumed. Then came the peculiarity of my own footfalls. They echoed, yes, but with a disturbing counterpoint, as if an unseen twin paced me just beyond the warped planks of the wall. A physical jolt, sharp and sudden, resonated in my chest. My pulse leaped. Air hitched in my throat. Acoustics, I reasoned fiercely, the deceptive sound play of vast, empty chambers. Inside, the air hung thick with the ghosts of hay and the slow decay of damp wood. I navigated precarious floorboards, eyes straining against the gloom. Nothing. Not a flicker of fur nor feather. Just emptiness. My imagination, I chided myself, already running riot. This was timber and nails, rot and repair, nothing more. I shook my head, dismissing the tremor, and turned back to the task. Days bled into a routine of excavation. I unearthed strata of forgotten labor, drifts of rusted tools, constellations of bent nails, fractured furniture limbs, the stiffened leather ghosts of horse tack piled in corners. Dust became my constant companion, coating my gloves, stinging my eyes. Trailer loads of debris rattled away down the track, disgorged into designated oblivion. Amidst this purging, the land held its breath, broken only by the occasional sigh of wind through skeletal trees. Yet, pauses would punctuate my labor, moments where I'd freeze, convinced of phantom steps crunching gravel behind me, or the murmur of indistinct voices carried on the breeze. A swift turn, a scan of the vacant yard. Always only stillness answered. It was the 6th day, perched precariously atop a tall ladder patching the main barn's wounded roof, that the uncanny truly asserted itself. Hammer, nails, raw timber balanced against the vast blue canvas of the sky. The sun pressed down like a blacksmith's thumb, sweat tracing paths through the grime on my forehead. Mid-swing, hammering home a fresh board, a voice materialized. Distant, soft, a mere thread of sound, like someone whispering secrets just beyond hearing. I froze, ladder swaying slightly, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The hammer slipped, a near disaster averted by a desperate grab. Clinging there, high above the earth, I forced my head to turn, sweeping the panorama. My truck, solitary by the fence line. Empty fields stretching to the horizon. A knot tightened in my throat. Dehydration? Heat stroke playing tricks on the senses? I swallowed, hard, marshaled my resolve, and drove the final nails home. That evening, armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, I resolved to map the lesser outbuildings, to truly grasp the scope of decay. A palpable sense of observation clung to me, weighting my steps on the gravel path. The night air lay placid, yet the weeds whispered with low rustles. My beam sliced through the dark, illuminating detritus. Shards of glass glinting like fallen stars, corroded hinges, coils of frayed rope. I kicked aside a warped plank, and a sudden movement flared behind me. I spun, light beam trembling, heart hammering. The yard gaped empty. Then, near one of the sheds, a flicker. A shape, tall and hunched, indistinct yet disturbingly crowned with what seemed like horns or antlers. It moved with unnatural swiftness, melting behind the shed's wall. Breath stalled in my lungs. My palms grew slick. Tentative steps forward, light pinned to the spot. "Hey!" I called out, my voice thin, swallowed by the space. "Who's there?" Only the echo replied, mocking. My own breath sounded ragged in the silence. Forcing myself onward, I rounded the corner. Nothing but stacked bricks crumbling into dust, a pile of lumber surrendering to rot. No tracks disturbed the packed earth, no whisper of concealment. Listening intently, I found only profound quiet. A wave of relief washed over me, immediately chased by a deeper unease. A trick of the light, a shadow puppet born of my own unsteady beam. Yet the form had felt substantial, its movement purposeful. Dawn found me stiff and unrested on the farmhouse cot, the previous night's encounter replaying behind my eyelids. Coffee, hot and black, did little to dispel the tension. Outside, dew jeweled the ground, my boots leaving sharp prints in the damp soil as I circled the shed from the night before. Near where the shape had vanished, a faint indentation marred the earth, but it was smeared, illegible. A deer, perhaps? A stray dog? Crouching, I traced the cool, crumbling soil with my fingertips. The unnerving sensation of being watched prickled the back of my neck. A glance over my shoulder revealed only the empty expanse. Despite the fraying nerves, work demanded attention. The afternoon was spent inside the second barn, tape measure in hand, envisioning a future gallery space. As I measured one long wall, a distinct scraping sound echoed from the opposite side like claws or something sharp, dragged deliberately across the wood. My heart gave a heavy thud. Wiping sweat from my upper lip, I moved to investigate, footsteps creaking on the complaining floorboards. Motes danced in the weak light filtering through a single grimy window, painting everything in shades of gray. There, in a shadowed corner, were fresh gouges marring the wall. Chest high, they slashed diagonally, deep enough to splinter the aged wood. My breath hitched. Touching the raw grooves, a tingling sensation crawled across my scalp. This wasn't random damage. It felt intentional. Back at the truck, phone in hand, I considered calling for backup, someone to help assess this mounting weirdness. But a stubborn pride, a familiar reliance on self-sufficiency held me back. Leaky pipes, faulty circuits, those were my adversaries, not spectral shapes and cryptic vandalism. Sounding paranoid felt like a failure. Phone pocketed, I opted for a technological approach. Motion sensor cameras. A quick trip into the nearest town yielded the necessary equipment. Before dusk painted the fields in long shadows, I had them mounted. Sentinels watching the barns, the sheds, the perimeter. Tests confirmed they functioned, sensitive to movement, capable in low light. Locking the barns felt less like security, more like sealing a tomb. I retreated to the farmhouse, seeking solace that refused to come. Sleep was a shallow, elusive thing. Small thuds echoed from outside, followed by pregnant silence. Around midnight, a flicker of light beneath the farmhouse door, one of the sensors, triggered. My pulse surged. I contemplated arming myself, a tire iron, a heavy wrench, but remained rooted to the cot, forcing a semblance of calm. An hour crawled by before exhaustion finally claimed me. Morning light brought immediate review of the camera footage. Several triggers clustered around midnight. Mostly frustrating blurs, streaks of motion too fast to decipher. One camera, however, caught a definite shadow flowing past the main barn door. Large, indistinct, gone in less than a second. A cold fist clenched in my gut. Proof of a sort. Something was undeniably out there. What remained terrifyingly unknown. The days that followed were a blur of labor. New boards replaced rotten ones, rusted sheet metal screeched its protest as I tore it away. The farmhouse porch received rudimentary repairs. Through it all, the auditory hauntings persisted. Faint echoes, like whispers just out of phase with reality. Sometimes seeming to emanate from just behind me, other times drifting down from the high rafters. Inspections revealed only dust-choked bird nests and elaborate spider webs. My hands, I noticed, had developed a slight tremor when hammering. My breath would catch unexpectedly. Clenching my fists, I forced focus onto the physical. The bite of the saw, the rhythmic impact of the hammer, the satisfying heft of new timber. Push the strangeness down. Build. One sweltering afternoon, hauling debris from the farthest barn, I stepped outside into a sudden, inexplicable pocket of cold air. It raised goosebumps despite the heat. Simultaneously, the wind gusted, slamming the heavy barn door shut behind me with startling force. I spun, yanked the handle, resistance, solid as if braced from within. Panic flared. I threw my weight into it, pulling harder. The door yielded abruptly. Inside, dusty emptiness, familiar scatterings of junk, motes dancing in the shafts of light. My hands trembled as I backed away. Then, a low growl, guttural and resonant, vibrated from the rafters above. My head snapped up. A shape crouched in the deep shadows of the roof beams. Dark, ill-defined, but undeniably there. A jolt, like ice water down my spine. Stumbling backward, I nearly tripped over stacked lumber. Flashlight beams stabbed upward, illuminating only a swirling galaxy of dust. When my eyes readjusted, the shape was gone. I fled into the sunlight, gasping, hands braced on my knees, trying to regain equilibrium. Was I losing my mind? Could a large animal have taken refuge up there? The structure seemed too frail for anything substantial. And the horns. That fleeting image lingered, unsettlingly specific. I forced myself to walk the perimeter again, scanning the whispering tree line. Grass rustled, gravel crunched. A dull ache settled in my lower back, a testament to constant tension. No movement disturbed the quiet fields, the scattered, watchful trees. That night, sleep was not an option. I sat in the farmhouse living room, flashlight heavy in my lap, windows open to the still air, listening. Around 1 a.m., a distinct thump sounded from the porch. My chest constricted. Swallowing hard, I rose, flashlight gripped tight. Heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I crept to the window and peered out. The weak porch light cast long, distorted shadows. Near the steps stood a tall silhouette, broad, bulky, and, yes, crowned with protrusions that spiked against the lesser darkness. My scalp prickled violently. My hand went to the doorknob, but an invisible force held me frozen, staring through the glass, straining to resolve the form. After what felt like an eternity, the shape shifted, moved fluidly off the porch, and dissolved into the deeper black of the yard. Where had it gone? Compelled by a desperate need for evidence, I forced myself outside, flashlight beam cut in the night. The porch boards groaned under my weight. I swept the light across the wood, down the steps, onto the dirt below. There, faint but discernible, impressions that looked unnervingly like hoof prints, oddly spaced. Bipedal. Squatting, I aimed the beam directly onto them. My hands shook. The night pressed in, utterly silent save for my own rapid breathing. I tried to follow the trail, but it vanished into the grass after only a few yards. A hollow feeling opened in my chest. I remained outside for several minutes, scanning the impenetrable darkness, but the night yielded no further secrets. The next morning, I called Marco, a friend in the contracting business. Could he spare a couple of guys? Lend a hand? I framed it as needing to accelerate the renovation, fallen behind schedule. No mention of nocturnal silhouettes or cloven tracks, just a plea for manpower. They arrived the following morning, their big work truck a welcome intrusion of normalcy, laden with tools and lumber. With more bodies on site, surely the strangeness would recede. We spent the day in a whirlwind of productive destruction and reconstruction, tearing out compromised beams, clearing mountains of debris, setting sturdy new supports. I kept one ear tuned to the background, listening for whispers, for scrapes, for anything amiss. Silence. Perhaps the sheer human presence acted as a deterrent. Later, hauling a heavy sack of trash toward the dumpster, a flicker of movement at the distant tree line caught my eye. I paused, the sack leaning against my leg. A dark shape slipped behind a thick trunk and was gone. My heart gave a familiar lurch, but I forced myself to turn away, rejoin the others. No one else remarked on anything unusual. I kept my sighting to myself. As evening fell, they packed up, their truck rumbling away, leaving me once more in the encroaching quiet. the familiar tension coiled in my stomach. Alone again. That night demanded one final camera check. Huddled over my laptop at the small farmhouse table, I reviewed the day's recordings. Nothing out of the ordinary during the work hours. But then, around sunset, one camera positioned near the main barn captured something. A shape moving through the tall, waving grass, bulky, possessing that same strange, jagged outline around its head. The hairs on my arms prickled. I advanced the footage frame by painstaking frame. The entity traversed the camera's view in perhaps 3 seconds. Unidentifiable. My mouth went dry. Heart thudded a heavy, anxious beat. I resolved to stay one final week, to complete the essential structural work myself before handing off to a permanent crew. Each day became a race against the setting sun, a forced march of productivity. Replacing siding, reinforcing floors, prepping walls for insulation. Keep the mind occupied, the hands busy. At night, the sounds returned. Distant clatters, faint scratching, but I resisted the urge to investigate alone. A constant ache resided between my shoulder blades. Sleep remained thin, fractured. My last day. I completed the final tasks on my list, walking through each revitalized space, making notes for the incoming team. Standing in the vast main barn, admiring the newly secured beams overhead, I heard it. A low grunt directly behind me. I spun, heart seizing. Silhouetted in the wide doorway, just for a heartbeat, stood the figure. Tall, broad-chested, undeniably horned. Then, with impossible speed, it darted sideways out of sight. My hands flew up, trembling violently. Breath caught, a painful knot in my throat. A full-body shiver racked me. Backing away, I collided hard with the support post, nearly dropping my clipboard. I scrambled outside into the harsh relief of daylight, eyes darting, searching. Nothing stirred but the indifferent grass, the sighing breeze. I locked everything, fumbling with the keys, climbed into my truck, and just sat, engine off, dragging air into my lungs. My chest felt banded with steel. Sweat slicked my neck. After a long minute, the engine roared to life. Driving away down the gravel road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The barns stood silent, deceptively peaceful under the bright sun. But I knew something resided there, something ancient or aberrant, defying explanation, defying repair. The knot of fear didn't begin to loosen until Willow Creek acreage was miles behind me. What exactly stalked those grounds, what voices whispered in the decaying timbers, remains an unanswered question. I passed the camera footage to the new crew lead, a terse warning to stay vigilant. No definitive reports have reached me since. But the sensation of being watched, the phantom echo of footfalls in dusty corridors, the indelible image of horns slipping into shadow, these things remain. If duty ever calls me back to that place, I won't be going armed with merely a flashlight. Until then, let the land keep its shadowed secrets. Attics held no allure for me, spaces thick with forgotten dust and the ghosts of stale air. But obligation nudged me forward that night. My cousin, Eliza, newly proprietor of a rambling country inn bequeathed by some distant relative, found herself adrift in a sea of inherited clutter and desperately short on help. She'd pleaded for my assistance, and, having already plumbed the depths of shadowed closets, damp basement corners, and dilapidated outbuildings, only the uppermost space remained. The attic. I anticipated gloom, knew the inn's antiquated wiring was a temperamental beast at best. Still, armed with my torch, I figured I could brave it. A quick reconnaissance, stash the linens, and retreat. The sheer strangeness awaiting me hadn't factored into my calculations. I ascended the pinched spiral of the attic stairs, the hour drifting towards the cusp of midnight. Each tread groaned its protest beneath my weight, the scent of aged timber and settled dust rising thick and cloying. A lone, naked bulb overhead cast a sickly, jaundiced glow, sputtering intermittently in a way that prickled the nerves. I tried to dismiss the tremor of unease, focusing instead on the unwieldy stack of crisp sheets threatening to escape my grasp, muttering curses as I wrestled them into submission. The space unfolded beneath low-slung wooden beams, a rib cage overhead. Cardboard sarcophagi leaned against the slanted walls. Discarded relics occupied the gloom, a rocking chair fractured beyond repair, a skeletal dresser gaping with missing drawers, twin cylinders of rolled carpet slumped in a far corner. I deposited the linens onto a large, brass-bound trunk, intending to clear a route to a promising metal rack at the attic's deeper end, a logical haven for spare bedding. Then, a whisper of movement to my left. A susurrus, dry and furtive. My head snapped around. A cat, perhaps, or something larger, furred and quick amongst the shadows. I saw no distinct form, only a fleeting disturbance, a blur against the periphery. Stepping closer, I sliced the darkness with my torch beam, probing the corner where the sound had originated. Nothing. Just dust motes dancing in the light. An old building, I reasoned, riddled with gaps, fissures where strays might find ingress. Plausible. As I nudged the heavy trunk aside to forge my path, a different sound intruded. A scuffling, heavier than any rodent, freighted with a dragon weight. It conjured the image of someone shuffling laboriously across the bare floorboards. A knot tightened in my gut. Goose flesh pebbled my arms. Calm down, I chided myself. Perhaps one of the few staff members had come up unseen, or Eliza checking my progress. Yet the steps felt oddly remote, misplaced, seeming to originate from above me, though only the pitched roof lay beyond the rafters. I swallowed, the frantic thrum of my pulse echoing in my throat. I froze, listening intently. Silence descended, broken only by the faint electrical hum of the failing bulb. Taking a shallow breath, I navigated towards the metal rack. I seized the sheets again, beginning to fold and place them onto the cool shelves. My gaze kept flicking over my shoulder, scanning the oppressive shadows. The torch, still clutched in my hand, began to stutter, its beam weakening. Dying batteries? The overhead light offered little solace, its glow pathetic against the encroaching dark. As the last sheet settled onto the rack, the shuffling returned. Closer this time, behind me, near the derelict rocking chair. I spun, torchlight spearing the gloom. The chair swam dimly into view. Had it shifted, rocked slightly on its broken runners? Or was the dimness, the tension, conjuring phantoms? My eyes snagged on a shape huddled near the beams, a dense knot of shadow against shadow. Featureless, yet possessing a scale that belied any animal. The distinct silhouette of a figure, crouched low, unnervingly still. My heart hammered against my ribs. I edged forward, tentative steps swallowed by the vast quiet. Before I could resolve the shape into anything concrete, my torch flickered violently, then extinguished utterly. Simultaneously, the overhead bulb dimmed to a barely perceptible orange filament. A bead of sweat traced a cold path down my temple. The fine hairs on my nape prickled. I shook the torch, a useless, desperate gesture. Dead. I stood rooted in the near absolute darkness, breath sawn in my chest. My palms felt slick. The frantic drumming in my ears was my own blood. The silhouette was lost to the blackness, but the palpable sense of presence remained, heavy and watchful. A soft groan emanated from the floorboards near the far corner. My breath hitched. Step by cautious step I retreated, stumbling backwards, colliding with unseen boxes, nearly losing my footing. My vision struggled to adapt, resolving only vague lumen shapes from the impenetrable dark. Something scraped along the wooden beam directly overhead. A sound like sliding feet, or perhaps hands, scrabbling across the ancient timber. The very air felt charged, hostile. Curiosity warred with primal fear, and fear won decisively. I wasn't staying to identify the source of the intrusion. Wheeling around, I plunged towards the stairwell, navigating by touch and memory. My shoulder slammed into a vertical support beam, pain shot, white hot, down my arm. Gritting my teeth, I pressed on, nearly tumbling headlong down the narrow steps in my haste, but catching myself on the railing. Reaching the relative safety of the hallway below, I slapped at the light switch at the base of the stairs. Futile. That bulb, too, was dead, or the inn's fickle power was dipping again. Without pausing, I fled down the corridor, past the silent doors of guest rooms, making straight for the lobby's weak circle of light where Eliza pored over receipts. She looked up, her expression shifting from concentration to alarm. I must have appeared spectral, drained of color. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Just spooked," I managed, the words feeling thin. "Thought I saw a cat up there." The lie tasted like ash, but admitting the full scope of my terror felt absurd, hysterical. Eliza nodded slowly. "I'll have a proper look in the morning," she murmured. Sleep offered little respite that night. Whenever consciousness threatened to drift, the memory of those dragging footfalls echoed in my mind, accompanied by the visceral image of that hunched shape observing me from the rafters. Just an animal, I told myself repeatedly, but the conviction felt hollow. There had been an intelligence, a stillness to that presence that felt chillingly human. Dawn broke gray and uncertain. Despite the lack of sleep, I rose early, drawn inexorably back towards the attic stairs. Eliza, already immersed in the morning rituals of the front desk, gave me leave to investigate but couldn't accompany me. Armed with fresh batteries, my torch now cast a strong, unwavering beam. I climbed the steps with deliberate slowness, wary of disturbing the settled dust, steeling myself. The attic, bathed now in the thin morning light filtering through a grimy dormer window, seemed benign, quiescent. The overhead bulb still flickered erratically. Furniture remained static. The sheets rested undisturbed on their rack. No immediate sign of intrusion. The rocking chair faced the wall, inert. But then my gaze fell upon the floor. There, stark against the gray film of dust, were footprints. Barefoot prints. Clear, distinct impressions tracing a path around the attic's perimeter, only to vanish abruptly near the far wall. A cold fist clenched in my chest. My mouth went dry. I considered the staff. 2 part-time cleaners, a cook largely confined to the kitchen. None had cause to be up here, let alone shoeless. Squatting, I examined the prints more closely. They appeared fresh, undeniably adult-sized. A wave of profound unease washed over me. A squatter? A transient finding refuge? But how bypass the locked ground floor, the occupied rooms, the staff? I traced the path of the footprints until they simply ceased near a stack of boxes crammed against the wall. I shifted the boxes, testing the floorboards beneath. They creaked but felt solid. No obvious trapdoor, no hidden panel. I scanned the walls and beams meticulously for any opening, any fissure large enough to admit a person. Spider webs and protruding nails were my only discoveries. Hurrying downstairs, I relayed my finding to Eliza, her brow furrowed with confusion and worry. She confirmed no one else possessed an attic key. The staff wouldn't venture up unbidden. Could the prints be old, she wondered? But the dust pattern was too clear, too recently disturbed. It seemed improbable. She insisted on seeing for herself. Together, we ascended into the dusty quiet. Eliza examined the footprints in silence, stepping carefully around them, her expression growing more troubled. No easy explanation presented itself. We resolved to keep the attic door securely locked henceforth, until some sense could be made of it. Eliza mused about installing a camera, but the inn lacked any modern surveillance infrastructure, save for a few cheap motion-activated lights outside meant to deter wildlife. That evening, I personally verified the attic lock, turning the key decisively and pocketing it. Several days remained of my promised assistance, so I threw myself into other tasks, sorting decades of paperwork, labeling storage crates, organizing the cavernous basement pantry. Yet, persistently, the image of those bare footprints pacing the dusty floor intruded upon my thoughts. Later, around 10 o'clock, while I sat alone in the dimly lit guest lounge, I heard it again. Faint, but unmistakable. From upstairs, the dragging, shuffling sound. Only 2 guest rooms were occupied by quiet, elderly couples. Eliza had retired early, citing an early start. The sound emanated from the ceiling, directly below the locked attic. My heart gave a heavy thud. Nobody should be up there. Decision made, I grabbed my torch and headed upstairs. The corridor lights cast long shadows, illuminating the attic door at the landing's end. It remained firmly closed. Reaching it, I tested the knob, locked solid. A small sigh of relief escaped me. Perhaps my nerves were frayed, my imagination running rampant. Then a faint, dry scraping sound whispered from behind the door. My hand recoiled as if burned. I stood frozen, scarcely breathing. The scraping ceased. The key felt heavy in my pocket. Did I truly want to confront whatever might be inside alone? The memory of the flashlight dying, the oppressive darkness, the unseen movement flooded back. My palms grew damp. After a long moment of internal debate, I acted. I unlocked the door, easing it open just a crack, shining the torch beam into the narrow space beyond. Only the bottom steps of the attic stairwell were visible, innocuous in the bright light. Relief warred with the nagging need for certainty. Slowly, cautiously, I climbed, torch beam preceding me, my own heartbeat a loud drum in the confined space. Each step seemed unnaturally loud. Reaching the top, I flipped the overhead switch. The bulb flickered to life, weak as ever. The attic lay silent, seemingly undisturbed. No fresh footprints marred the dust. No boxes were overturned. I conducted a thorough sweep, peering behind the trunk, into the empty drawers of the dresser, beneath the rack of linens. Nothing. I retreated, locking the door firmly behind me, and returned to my room. Lying in bed, staring at the textured ceiling, I couldn't reconcile the noises with the emptiness. The footprints, the sounds, the locked door. It felt less like a conventional intruder and more like something inherently wrong with the space itself. Sleep eventually claimed me, though it was shallow and fraught with uneasy dreams. The following morning, Eliza asked if I'd heard anything further. I recounted my late-night check, the locked door, the subsequent emptiness. She looked worn, the combined stress of the hotel's precarious finances and the unsettling events taking their toll. She proposed calling a handyman, a general contractor, someone to conduct a thorough inspection for hidden access points or structural anomalies. A sensible course of action, I agreed, though I doubted it would explain the chillingly deliberate nature of the sounds I'd heard. While awaiting the handyman's arrival, life at the inn continued. I assisted with check-ins, lent a hand with cleaning. In the afternoon, compelled by an uneasy curiosity, I ventured back to the attic one last time. Unlocking the door, I climbed into the familiar dusty light. The footprints remained, but they seemed fainter now, smudged, as if the dust around them had been subtly disturbed. Was it merely my own passage blurring the edges, or had something else moved here in the intervening hours? I spent a good hour meticulously examining every box, every neglected piece of furniture, probing corners and beams with my torchlight, searching for any overlooked crack or fissure. Nothing. The only anomaly was a faint, cool draft near the far wall where the footprints had ended, hinting at some unseen ventilation. A later inspection of the building's exterior revealed no obvious breach, no vent large enough for passage. We never unearthed a definitive explanation. The handyman came a few days later, conducted his survey, noted minor insulation deficiencies, and sealed a few insignificant cracks. He found nothing to suggest clandestine entry and recommended updating the attic wiring to address the flickering lights. Eliza had the work done. For a time, the strange noises seemed to cease. Yet, even amidst the restored quiet, the feeling of an unseen presence lingered. Sometimes, late at night, I'd fancy I heard it, a brief, almost subliminal dragging sound from overhead. It never lasted. Eliza admitted to hearing it too, once or twice, though she actively tried to dismiss it. We tacitly agreed. The attic door stayed locked, entry reserved for absolute necessity only. I remained at the inn for another week, helping Eliza impose some semblance of order on the place before returning home. On my final night, passing the attic staircase en route to my room, I paused, my gaze drawn to the locked door. An instinct, cold and certain, warned me away. The memory of the shape in the shadows, its silent vigil, the inexplicable appearance and disappearance of the footprints. It coalesced into a profound sense of dread. No neat solution ever presented itself. Whether it was a hidden occupant, a trick of acoustics and frayed nerves, or something altogether less mundane, I couldn't say. But the recollection of that first night, the sudden plunge into darkness, the heavy tread above me, retains the power to raise the hairs on my skin. Should I ever return to help Eliza, one thing is certain. The attic, locked or otherwise, will remain firmly off limits. Some darknesses are best left undisturbed. The very grain of the afternoon air felt different that day, clinging to my skin with an oppressive weight, thick as if anticipating a storm. Elias, that's me, was piloting my sedan down a ribbon of antiquated highway, dispatched toward some tedious client negotiation in a town barely registering on the map. Corporate drudgery. Mostly, the road unfurled in vacant stretches, its surface a mosaic of fractured asphalt and spectral yellow lines long surrendered to sun and time. I'd angled the windows just so, inviting a sliver of cool air to cut the cabin's stillness. Nothing in the departure that morning hinted at deviation, a routine transit, utterly mundane, until the moment it wasn't. Near a languid curve, the first anomaly registered. The wind suddenly animated. Arid leaves skittered across the tarmac, their dry susurrus invading the quiet hum of the engine. Then, further on, dust motes coalesced, pirouetting in the hazy distance, a contained vortex, spinning fiercely on a fixed point, refusing the wind's natural drift. It wasn't mere capricious air, it possessed structure, the phantom architecture of a barrier woven from atmosphere, grit, and decaying foliage. A knot tightened in my chest. Instinctively, my foot eased off the accelerator. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, breath held captive in my lungs. This localized tempest showed no inclination to yield, stubbornly occupying the center of my path. A glance at the dashboard clock confirmed my lateness. Duty gnawed, urging me onward, yet a primal caution screamed restraint. Still, the meeting beckoned. Tentatively, I applied pressure to the gas, creeping toward the swirling obstruction, gambling on its imminent dispersal. The instant my vehicle's prow breached the dusty veil, a profound judder resonated through the chassis. Not a violent impact, but a deep, internal tremor emanating from the car's very bones. Simultaneously, the radio erupted. The pop song I'd half listened to vanished, supplanted by a raw, crackling static. It filled the interior, a chaotic overlay of sibilant whispers and high-frequency drones, unintelligible yet possessed of a disquieting cadence, like a congregation murmuring secrets in unison. My skin prickled. My throat constricted, dry as parchment, as beads of perspiration gathered along my hairline. Another tremor, subtle this time, traveled up the steering column into my arms. My heart began a frantic tattoo against my ribs. My foot found the brake, pressing harder. The whirlwind spat fine debris against the windshield, a light, insistent tapping. Then, abruptly, the barrier was behind me. Calm air rushed to fill the void, but the radio persisted in its alien broadcast. Unable to bear the sound, I stabbed the power button, silencing it. Drawing ragged breaths, I risked a look in the rearview mirror. The dust devil remained, unmoving, a solitary dervish performing its endless rotation on the asphalt I'd just traversed. My thoughts scrambled for explanations. A freak microburst, an unusual thermal current. Neither accounted for the phantom chorus embedded in the static, That sound had struck a deeper chord of fear, intimate and unnerving, as if I, Elias, had been specifically targeted. At the next viable shoulder, a patch of sun-baked gravel, I signaled and pulled over, my hands betraying me with their trembling. Hazard lights pulsed rhythmically. I sat for a moment, focusing on the simple mechanics of inhale, exhale, attempting to quell the rising panic. A persistent tickle lingered at the nape of my neck, the ghost sensation of those whispered frequencies still echoing, even in the radio's absence. I pushed the driver's door open, stepping out onto unsteady legs, my chest constricted. The sun, now descending behind a phalanx of trees, cast elongated, spidery shadows across the road. My gaze swung back to the phenomenon. It hadn't shifted, still twisting leaves and earth into its miniature cyclone. A faint, disembodied voice seemed to resonate within my own skull, a residual static that made my ears ring. Compelled by a need for normalcy, I unlatched the hood, pretending to inspect the engine for damage from the vibrations. Everything appeared superficially intact, though my pulse hammered with an intensity that felt skull-bound. A low breeze stirred the roadside foliage, sending dust swirling around my shoes. I slammed the hood shut, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. It was then, from the periphery of my vision, that I registered movement. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. There, within the heart of the spinning vortex, stood a silhouette. Tall, slender, its form obscured by the churning debris. A cold tingle crawled across my scalp. My stomach plummeted. The shape resembled a human clad in dark attire, yet its features remained maddeningly indistinct. Dust and leaves whipped around it as it stood motionless, oriented toward me. No face was visible, but the sensation of being watched was absolute, visceral. Every nerve ending screamed alert. I scanned the tree lines flanking the highway. Empty. No other vehicles approached. I was utterly alone with this apparition. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton. My hands shook uncontrollably. My feet seemed fused to the gravel. The whirlwind intensified, its whooshing sound amplifying around the figure. Then, as swiftly as it had materialized, the silhouette pivoted and glided towards the trees. It didn't walk, not precisely. It seemed absorbed by the deepening shadows at the wood's edge. The dust devil spun for another heartbeat, then collapsed with startling suddenness, its captive leaves fluttering limply to the ground. I coughed, the airborne grit catching in my throat, and took a few hesitant steps forward, eyes straining into the gloom beneath the canopy. The distant snap of a twig reached me, but the trees guarded their secrets. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clenched my fists, torn between the urge to flee and a morbid curiosity pulling me toward the spot where the figure had vanished. Forcing myself into motion, I circled the passenger side of the car, a cursory inspection born more of delaying the inevitable than genuine concern. Tires inflated, paint unmarred. The vortex had left no physical trace, yet the feeling of unseen eyes boring into my back persisted, a palpable pressure. Panic coiled tighter in my chest, making my breath hitch. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised colors. Staying here much longer meant facing this desolate stretch after nightfall. The thought soured my stomach. I'd never considered myself prone to superstition, but the radio's spectral chorus and the figure in the dust had frayed my rationality. This place felt intrinsically unsafe. My body remained coiled, muscles taut, ears straining against the quiet. Back inside the car, I slammed the door and thumbed the lock. The key turned in the ignition. Relief, sharp and fleeting, washed over me as the engine hummed to life. Then, the radio clicked on, unbidden. The volume was low, almost subliminal, but the static was unmistakable. Those distorted, sibilant whispers seeped back into the cabin. My hand spasmed on the wheel. I jabbed the power button again, tapped the console frantically. The sound persisted, seeming to emanate from deep within the dashboard, from the very fabric of the speakers. A brief hiss, then something that almost resolved into a garbled human word before dissolving back into pure noise. Sweat traced a path down my temple. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide, haunted eyes, shallow breaths fogging the glass momentarily. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Predictable on this forgotten highway, yet it amplified my isolation. Shoving the device back into my pocket, I gritted my teeth and assaulted the radio's power button again, repeatedly. Finally, the static subsided into a strained silence, though whether it was truly gone or merely dormant, I couldn't be sure. Shifting into drive, I pulled onto the asphalt, deliberately fixing my gaze forward, resisting the urge to consult the mirror. My heart galloped. My foot felt leaden on the accelerator. A sideways glance at the gravel shoulder revealed nothing but empty space and a scattering of leaves. The whirlwind, the figure, vanished. The road ahead looked deceptively peaceful. Miles dissolved beneath the tires, each one measured by the frantic thrumming in my temples. I switched on the air conditioning, hoping to purge the stale, charged atmosphere inside the car. My throat felt raw, my skin clammy. Composure remained elusive, but I focused on keeping my grip steady. Sporadic crackles from the speakers made me flinch, muscles tensing, but the full static didn't return. A faded green sign promised the next town in 10 miles. My plan solidified. Find the first gas station, any semblance of civilization. I needed a moment, cold water on my face, a chance to convince myself I hadn't hallucinated the entire episode. Yet the conviction remained. The figure was real. Its presence, its stare through the dust, I felt it still, lodged deep in my chest. Eventually, an old service station materialized on the right, its sign flickering erratically, the entire place exuding an air of neglect. It would have to do. I parked beside a skeletal, rust-streaked pump under the lonely glare of an overhead lamp illuminating cracked concrete. Killing the engine, I listened intently. Silence. A slow exhale escaped my lips. Outside, the air smelled of stale gasoline and engine oil. The attached store boasted a grimy window plastered with faded flyers and a door sagging on its hinges. Inside, a minuscule counter was presided over by a clerk radiating profound boredom. I offered only a curt nod, retrieved a water bottle from a humming cooler, and paid. He inquired idly if I was southbound. "Yes," I replied, then hesitantly, "See anything unusual on the highway today?" He merely shrugged, his expression suggesting I'd sprouted antenna. "Nah," he drawled. "Wind kicks up dust sometimes. Locals got stories, haunted this and that." Never seen nothing myself." He returned his attention to a dog-eared magazine. I didn't press further. Unscrewing the cap, I drank deeply, the cool liquid a small comfort to my parched throat. Leaning against the car's flank, I watched the sky bleed into deep orange. The temperature was noticeably dropping. My mind replayed the encounter, the impossible vortex, the chilling presence within. My knees felt weak, tremulous, as if after immense exertion. I pressed a palm to my forehead, feeling the heat radiating from my own skin. Lingering felt wrong. I needed to reach the town proper before full dark descended. The final stretch of highway passed in a state of heightened tension, yet uneventfully. The radio remained blessedly mute. The wind stayed calm. The road surface varied, smooth stretches alternating with jarring cracks that sent thuds through the tires. Each thump was a minor shock to my frayed nerves. My mirror checks became obsessive, scanning the empty blacktop behind me. Finally, the scattered lights of the small town emerged from the twilight. Driving beneath the relative normalcy of street lamps, past modest houses, felt like surfacing from deep water. I navigated to the motel parking lot, cut the engine, and let my shoulders slump, aching from the sustained tension in my grip. Retrieving my suitcase from the back seat, I slammed the door, locking it swiftly. My eyes darted around the dimly lit lot, half expecting a swirling column of dust or a shadowy figure lurking near the periphery. Inside the room, thin walls transmitting the muffled drone of a neighboring television, I dropped my suitcase onto the bedspread. A fine tremor persisted in my hands. Leaning against the small desk by the window, I drew several deliberate breaths, attempting to anchor myself to the present, to convince myself the ordeal was concluded. But the figure's image was indelible. The memory of those static-laden voices resonated. Relief felt distant, counterfeit. Instead, a pervasive sense that something unseen had latched onto me, followed me from that desolate highway, lingered like a cold draft. My skin prickled with the phantom sensation of its gaze. Through the night, I found myself repeatedly drawn to the window, peering into the darkness, dreading what I might see waiting there. Sleep offered little respite. My mind compulsively replayed the sequence, the anomalous swirl, the car's shuddering protest, the radio's spectral transmission. Every detail remained sharp, insistent, a constant reminder that something on that road had singled me out. Within the flimsy security of those 4 motel walls, the uneasy conviction grew. My encounter on that old highway was no mere bizarre incident. It felt like a threshold crossed, a door pushed open into somewhere unknown, and I possessed no knowledge of how to shut it again. Bathed in the amber wash of twilight, the cottage presented a facade of rustic charm, lichen-kissed granite, a roof thick as slumber, our pastoral idyll dreamt of for years. Yet, as my fingers wrestled with the obstinate brass key, an unnatural coldness seeped into my bones, a certainty prickling beneath my skin. Unseen eyes regarded us from the shadowed depths behind the diamond-paned glass. "Papa, hurry! My room!" Elodie's small hand tugged, her vibrant energy a brief antidote to my unease. I summoned a strained smile, the lock finally yielding with a groan. Inside, the air hung thick, heavy with the perfume of decay and long neglect. Clara, ever the optimist, crinkled her nose. "A bit of fresh air will sort this," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. I nodded, attempting to mirror her bright facade. Years of scrimping, years of yearning for this quietude, for Elodie to know green fields instead of gray concrete. This refuge was meant to be our genesis. As dusk deepened that inaugural evening, the house began its symphony of groans and sighs, ancient timbers protesting our intrusion, settling around us like a shroud. Mundane explanations, I told myself, the natural respiration of old wood, yet sharp and sudden while we stood clustered in the cavernous kitchen. A door slammed shut on the floor above. An undeniable, solitary report. "I'll investigate," I offered, striving to banish the quaver from my tone. Clara's gaze held a flicker of worry, but she remained silent. The staircase spiraled upwards, narrow and steep, swallowing the meager light. Shadows clung like old cobwebs to the upper landing. My hand skimmed the rough-textured plaster as I crept along the corridor. The door intended for Elodie's sanctuary stood partially open. I nudged it wider, vacant. Dust motes danced in the gloom, but turning to retreat, my eye snagged on the sill. There, imprinted starkly in the gray film, was the perfect outline of a hand. Impossibly delicate, unnervingly small. A child's print. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I backed away, descending quickly, the secret a cold weight in my chest. Why frighten them on this first night? There had to be an explanation, didn't there? That night, sleep proved elusive in the complaining embrace of the ancient bed. The night outside alive with unfamiliar whispers and rustles. Clara's voice, hushed beside me in the dark, broke the silence. "Arthur, was this wise? Coming here?" I drew her near, the scent of her hair a small anchor in the strangeness. "It's perfect," I murmured, the lie tasting like ash. "Just needs settling in." Even as the words formed, a sound uncoiled through the house. A protracted, desolate moan that vibrated in the very floorboards. We both stiffened, listening intently into the oppressive blackness. "What?" Clara breathed. "The wind," I insisted, my own conviction paper thin. Old houses breathe differently. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us, though slumber offered no true respite. My dreams were haunted landscapes, filled with flickering shapes at the edge of vision and sibilant whispers in a tongue I could not grasp. Dawn arrived gray and grudging. Fatigue frayed our nerves, yet we attempted the rituals of moving in. Elodie, blessedly unaware, charted the cottage's secrets with boundless curiosity. It began subtly amidst the shifting of boxes in the sitting room, a faint scritch from within the walls. Vermin, I reasoned, an unwelcome but mundane reality of rural life. But the sound persisted, intensified, migrating with us, an insistent rhythmic scraping just beyond the plaster. Clara's eyes met mine, wide with alarm, as a particularly violent scratching erupted near the hearth. "Pest control," she suggested, her voice taut. I nodded, seizing the practical excuse, but my mobile displayed only "no service." The newly installed landline offered merely a hiss of empty static. Isolation, sudden and complete, closed in. Nightfall brought not rest, but terror. Elodie's shriek tore through the stillness, sharp as shattered glass. We scrambled to her bedside. She sat bolt upright, trembling, eyes vast with fright. "The lady," she choked out between sobs, clinging to Clara. "She wore old clothes. She was right there, watching." A frantic search revealed nothing. No trace of entry, no earthly explanation. As I turned from the window, my foot brushed against an object on the floorboards. A doll. Small, porcelain-faced, clad in faded lace. A relic utterly unfamiliar. Certainly not present when we'd tucked Elodie in. The following day descended into a waking nightmare. Phenomena multiplied, volumes tumbling from undisturbed shelves, pockets of unnatural chill blooming in sunlit rooms, mist in our breath, and the omnipresent sensation of scrutiny. We clung to rationalizations, flimsy shields against mounting dread. The final shred of denial evaporated when we found Elodie in the kitchen, chattering animatedly to the empty air by the pantry, describing with chilling clarity a sad little boy only she could perceive. "We have to get help, Arthur," Clara whispered, her voice ragged. "This place, it isn't right." Agreement lodged cold in my throat, but the phones remained dead stones, and the car, inexplicably, refused even a sputter of life. We were marooned. As twilight bled into night, the house unleashed its full fury. Objects became projectiles hurled by unseen forces. Whispers eddied from vacant corners, formless and sibilant. The scratching within the walls reached a crescendo, a frantic scrabbling as if something desperate sought egress. We huddled on the sitting room sofa, Elodie finally succumbing to exhausted sleep between us, every creak, every shadow amplifying our terror. "What do we do?" Clara pleaded, her face pale in the gloom. Before I could shape a response, utter blackness descended as every light extinguished simultaneously. The ensuing silence was absolute, profound. Even the incessant scratching abruptly stilled. A fragile hope flickered. Was it over? Then, from the landing above, the slow, deliberate tread of heavy footfalls. Thump, thump, thump. Pacing the upper floor, drawing nearer. Clara's fingers dug into my arm, her breath coming in panicked gasps. I was rooted, ice flooding my veins. The steps reached the stairwell. Thump, thump, thump. Descending now, each impact resonating through the old wood. My voice, when I found it, was a thin, reedy thing. Who's there?" The footsteps halted. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then a voice emerged from the darkness, ancient, dry as dust, dripping venom. "This is our home." A pause pregnant with menace. "And you are not welcome." Instantly, the air filled with a sibilant chorus, dozens of voices whispering, overlapping. "Not welcome, not welcome, not welcome." Elodie startled awake, her cry swallowed by the spectral din. Furniture shuddered violently, portraits leaped from the walls, and an impossible wind, frigid and rank with the smell of old earth and decay, tore through the room. Raw terror finally broke my paralysis. I snatched Elodie into my arms, seized Clara's hand, and lunged towards the door, fleeing into the night. We stumbled out, collapsing onto the dew-damp verge of the lane, lungs burning, hearts hammering. Drawn by some morbid compulsion, I looked back. The cottage stood inert beneath the moon, deceptively tranquil, but framed in an upper window, stark against the blackness, a silhouette took shape. The woman, her features contorted in a rictus of triumphant malice. Slowly, deliberately, she raised a hand in a gesture of mocking dismissal. Then she dissolved, leaving only empty glass reflecting the indifferent stars. We never retrieved our belongings. We walked until dawn painted the horizon, finding refuge in the mundane reality of the nearest town. Weeks passed before the words could be spoken, before the shared nightmare could be tentatively explored. We left the cottage to its spectral occupants, abandoning our rural dream. Yet the escape feels incomplete. In the deepest hours of the night, the whispers sometimes return, faint echoes on the edge of hearing. The sensation of being watched persists, a cold spot in the periphery of my soul. And the question lingers. Did we truly get away? Or did a fragment of us remain behind, perpetual trespassers in a house that never wanted us? The hamlet evoked a forgotten page of history, impervious to the relentless march of years. Yet, drawing nearer, a current prickled the nape of my neck. Something here was profoundly, intrinsically amiss. For days uncounted, I, Elias, had traversed the emerald depths of the Pacific Northwest's old-growth forests, immersed in the solace, the untamed majesty of the wild. A seasoned wanderer of backcountry trails, I believed myself familiar with nature's repertoire, yet nothing foretold the scene encountered that particular afternoon. The path beneath my boots had dissolved, a mere whisper under layers of pine duff and decaying leaves. Unease began to coil. Had I deviated too far from the blazed route? When a flicker arrested my gaze. Smoke, pale tendrils unspooling skyward through the dense canopy. Hope surged, perhaps a ranger outpost or a designated campsite. Assistance, at the very least, directions. Parting a heavy veil of ferns, I emerged onto the cusp of a small clearing. The vista halted me, breath caught in my throat. A village lay nestled there, utterly alien to my experience. Structures of rough-hewn logs and bundled thatch huddled near a central fire pit, embers glowing like watchful eyes. Figures moved within this tableau, clad in coarse, homespun garments reminiscent of settlers from centuries past. Children darted in play, their laughter echoing strangely, while women stirred pots over flames and men plied rudimentary tools. A fleeting thought arose, some elaborate historical reenactment. Yet no placard, no interpretive sign suggested anything but authenticity. A living community, inexplicably suspended outside of time. My initial shock yielded to burgeoning fascination. For an amateur ethnographer like myself, this was a discovery bordering on myth, a culture hermetically sealed from modernity, thriving in America's deep wilderness. Astounding. I stepped fully into the clearing, raising a hand. "Hello?" My voice cracked the quiet air. I seemed to have lost my way. Could anyone offer assistance? The reaction was instantaneous, chilling. Every head swiveled, every gaze fixed upon me with an unnerving focus that crawled beneath my skin. The murmur of life ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it felt orchestrated, broken only by the insistent crackle of the fires. A man detached himself from the assembly and approached. Tall, sinewed, his face a map etched by wind and sun, his hands thick with calluses. His eyes, an arresting shade of pale cerulean, seemed to pierce directly into me. "Greetings, wayfarer," he intoned, his voice possessing the rough texture of bark. "You have wandered far indeed from the trodden ways." I offered my name, Elias, stammering an explanation of my trek, my disorientation. Even as I spoke, I registered the villagers drawing closer, forming a loose semicircle. Their scrutiny was overt, laced with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Curiosity, yes, but also something akin to appetite, expectation. A cold knot tightened in my gut. "You carry the weariness of your journey," the man stated. He named himself Malachi, the community's elder. "Come, rest with us, share our sustenance. We shall speak of returning you to your world when the sun rises." My world. The turn of phrase snagged, peculiar, yet exhaustion and hunger dulled my apprehension. I followed Malachi towards one of the larger dwellings, acutely conscious of the collective stare tracking my passage. Inside, shadowed and smelling of wood smoke and something else vaguely metallic, others were gathered. They besieged me with questions about the realm beyond the forest, their expressions wide with naive wonder as I spoke of devices that captured lightning and glass and metal birds that traverse the heavens. It felt like conversing with phantoms from another epoch. As twilight bled into true night, they presented a meal, a thick, savory stew that warmed my core and weighted my eyelids. Malachi guided me to a small, secluded hut furnished with a rough pallet, assuring me the morrow would bring clarity on my departure. Logically, exhilaration should have coursed through me at this unparalleled find. Instead, lying there in the dark, a pervasive sense of dread refused to dissipate. An indefinable wrongness clung to this place, to these people, their intense observation, their strangely archaic idioms, the sheer impossibility of such isolation in this era. The pieces refused to align. Sleep offered little respite, a turbulent sea of shadowed woods and unblinking eyes. I jolted awake in the pre-dawn murk, heart hammering against my ribs. A disturbance, a subtle shift in the hut's atmosphere had roused me. I was not alone. A silhouette stood framed in the doorway, stark against the faint external luminescence. I recognized her. Lyra, one of the younger women, scarcely more than a girl. "You must depart," she breathed, the whisper urgent, fraught. "Now, before the others stir." I pushed myself upright, senses instantly sharp. What? Why? Her gaze flickered nervously back towards the sleeping village. "This place, it is not as it appears. We are not what you perceive. Flee before the threshold is crossed." Ice traced its way down my spine. What threshold? What is this place? "There is no time," she hissed, already dissolving back into the gloom. "Go east. Follow the dawn. Do not falter. Do not turn. If they call your name, do not heed it. Run." Before another question could form, she vanished, ephemeral as smoke. My thoughts whirled, yet primal instinct screamed compliance. Snatching my pack, I slipped from the hut's confines. The village lay quiescent, fires reduced to pulsing embers. A deceptive tranquility overlaid a palpable, weighted menace. I reached the clearing's edge when the sound began. A low, undulating wail that curdled my blood. Another joined it, then a third, coalescing into an inhuman chorus rising against the bruised dawn sky. They knew. I bolted. Branches lashed my face as I plunged into the undergrowth, lungs burning, breath tearing raggedly. Behind me, the cries pursued, drawing nearer with uncanny speed. Whatever hunted me navigated the tangled woods with a swiftness and grace that defied human limits. The first fragile spears of sunlight pierced the canopy as I erupted from the tree line onto a scree-covered slope. I scrambled upward, loose rock cascading beneath my frantic feet. The summit, perhaps from there, a road, a sign of salvation. Halfway ascended, a grip like iron clamped around my ankle. I kicked wildly, connecting with something yielding yet solid. A guttural grunt, and the pressure eased. Clawing the final distance, I hauled myself over the precipice. The panorama below stole my breath. A sprawling valley unfolded, cradling a city, undeniably modern, its structures and roadways shimmering. The distant hum of traffic a faint promise. It had been adjacent all along, concealed by the mountain's bulk. A laugh, sharp with relief, tried to surface but died stillborn as I turned. My pursuers crested the ridge. They wore the faces of the villagers, yet distorted, nightmarish. Skin unnaturally pallid, eyes distended, mouths stretched in grins revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Their movements possessed a terrifying, liquid grace. Malachi led them, his benevolent mask discarded, revealing something ancient, dreadful, his pale eyes incandescent with unholy light. "Did you imagine departure was permitted?" he snarled, the sound like boulders grinding. "That we would allow you to return, to expose all we have preserved?" "What are you?" The words were a strangled rasp. His laughter scraped the air. "We are the first inhabitants, the forgotten lineage. These woods have been our sanctuary since before your kind erected their brittle cities and knelt to fleeting gods. We remain apart, by necessity. Yet, sometimes..." His gaze swept over me, raw hunger flickering within its depths. "Sometimes replenishment is required." They advanced, fanning out, hemming me in. Retreat brought the sheer drop yawning at my heels. Pebbles dislodged, whispering down the cliff face into the shadowed forest far below. "Two paths lie before you," Malachi offered, his tone now almost silken. "Return with us. Embrace the change. Become eternal. Or..." His gaze drifted meaningfully towards the abyss. Time warped, stretching thin. My eyes darted between the monstrous figures before me, the vertiginous fall behind, and the city gleaming in the valley, achingly near, yet worlds away. Closing my eyes, I drew a single deep breath, and chose. I leaped. Wind screamed past, the world a chaotic spin of sky, trees, and the rapidly approaching, unforgiven earth. Fleeting glimpses registered, the furious, howling figures silhouetted against the dawn above. I wish I could claim some profound epiphany illuminated those final seconds, a life flashing in review. Instead, a single, stark thought dominated. This will hurt. Then came the violent embrace of the canopy, branches snapping, clawing like desperate hands as I plummeted through. Abruptly, the falling ceased. Opening my eyes, convinced of my demise, I was met instead by an agony that saturated every nerve ending. Impossibly, miraculously, I lived. For long moments I lay immobile, fearing movement would reveal catastrophic injury. Eventually, trembling, I managed to sit. No bones seemed shattered, though lacerations and burgeoning bruises mapped my body. Looking up, the cliff seemed immense, yet perhaps not quite the fatal height perceived in panic. Fortune, interwoven with yielding branches and soft forest floor, had conspired to save me. Of Malachi and the others, there was no trace. Perhaps their domain was inviolable. Perhaps they presumed the fall sufficient. Regardless, I would not linger. Each motion was a trial, but I forced myself upright and began the trek east, towards the city, towards the familiar world. Hours later, bruised and staggering, I stumbled onto asphalt. A passing driver, startled by my ravaged appearance and wild eyes, summoned aid. At the hospital, I recounted a fractured truth. Lost hiker. Unfortunate tumble down a cliff. The officers nodded, their expression sympathetic, clearly categorizing me as another ill-prepared tourist overwhelmed by the wilderness. The full account remained locked within me. Who would grant it credence? There are times I question the reality of it, wondering if solitude and trauma birthed a waking nightmare. But then, on still nights, when the wind murmurs secrets through the pines, memory surfaces, sharp and undeniable. The village out of time, the creatures with smiles full of razors, the terrible precipice and the choice it demanded. And the certainty persists. Somewhere within those deep, shadowed woods they endure, watching, waiting, forever hungry. That crude knot of rock, I recall its unsettling weight the day it came into my hands. Hewn into a rough approximation of a head, it possessed neither eyes nor nose, only a mouth. And what a mouth! A rigid crescent carved into its surface, a smile so devoid of warmth it chilled me instantly. A gift, they'd said. I'd tried a brittle laugh, placing it upon the étagère in my living room, but from that moment a disquiet bloomed, the prickly conviction of being observed. Eyeless, yes, yet its blank face seemed locked onto me, an invisible gaze I couldn't shake. Mine is a solitary existence within these four walls, a single bedroom adjoining a living space furnished sparsely, a window overlooking the indifferent street, twin armchairs sighing under their worn fabric, a low table, the aforementioned étagère cluttered with accumulated trifles. The stone head found its place on the uppermost shelf, nudged to the right beside a paperback perpetually bookmarked mid-story. Immediately, its posture snagged my attention. A distinct forward cant, as though craning, peering down into the room. An imbalance in the carving, I reasoned, or perhaps the shelf itself listed. A quick, firm nudge to seat it securely, and I turned back to the rhythm of my solitary day. Evening descended, pooling shadows in the corners. I sat, sunk into the armchair, the glow of my phone a small, cold comfort, my gaze snagging repeatedly on the effigy. Each time I could have sworn its orientation had shifted. Now, leaning forward with unnerving eagerness, now swiveled a hair's breadth leftward. Imagination, my rational mind insisted, a frantic whisper against the rising tide of unease. I rose, traversed the small space, and meticulously repositioned the stone head. Back in my chair, minutes stretched taut. Then, goose flesh prickled along my arms. I looked. It had pivoted fractionally to the right, its blankness now aimed squarely at me. A frantic flutter began in my chest, a trapped bird beating against ribs. The floor must be uneven, I muttered, the words feeling hollow. Again, I fussed with it, attempting to stabilize it with a folded scrap of cardboard wedged beneath its base. I flicked on the television, seeking refuge in its flickering light and noise. Hours later, retreating to bed, I felt no specific disturbance, yet the room retained a charged quality, the distinct impression of sharing the space with something silent, something watchful. The following morning, I entered the living room to find the stone head undeniably facing me. It was angled outward from the wall, a clear rotation performed in the silent hours. I stood, rubbing sleep from my eyes, a cold certainty settling in my gut. I hadn't left it like that. Sleepwalking wasn't among my known habits. Lifting it, its stony coolness seeped into my palm. I paced with it for a moment, examining the smooth curve of that unrelenting grin. Discomfort coiled within me, yet I clung to the explanation. Peculiar art, nothing more. I returned it to the etagere, resolving to ignore it, banish it from my thoughts. Work beckoned. I left, pushing the image away, though it surfaced sporadically throughout the day like a dark bubble rising through water. I almost convinced myself I'd magnified trivialities. Just a lump of rock, crudely carved. Still, a persistent urge whispered, dispose of it. Leave it on a thrift store shelf. Bury it in a box. Yet, a conflicting sense of obligation to its giver stayed my hand. Perhaps hiding it away would suffice. The thought lingered, a potential compromise. Nightfall again found me seeking distraction before the television. The effigy maintained its post on a shelf. I tried to lose myself in a film, frayed nerves humming beneath my skin. During a lull, my eyes flickered towards it. The overhead light sculpted deep shadows around the mouth, amplifying the rigid smile into a leer. And then, did it shift? A tremor, infinitesimally small, like a stone-drawn breath. My heart leapt, my stomach clenched tight. I fumbled for the remote, cranking the volume, wrenching my gaze away. Dampness bloomed on my palms. I wiped them repeatedly on my trousers. The movie became meaningless noise. Finally, I surrendered, switching off the set and rising to seek the dubious sanctuary of my bedroom. Passing the etagere, I fought the impulse to look, but failed. It seemed to lean towards me again, straining from its perch. My mouth was parchment dry. I fled the room. Once in bed, the image replayed itself. A trick of the light, surely. I squeezed my eyes shut, commanding sleep that refused to come. Sleep was a shallow, fraught thing that night, drifting off only to jerk awake convinced of a noise, a faint, dry scraping, so subtle it might have been blood rushing in my ears. Yet each time my pulse hammered. Eventually, unable to bear the listening dark, I slipped from bed and crept towards the living room, Flipping the switch, I scanned the room. The effigy remained on its shelf, yet closer to the precipice. A cold prickle traced my spine. Swallowing hard, I took it down, turned its blank face firmly towards the wall. A test. If it moves, I thought, I'll know. I retreated back to the uneasy dark of my bedroom. Morning light revealed the failure of my experiment. Stepping into the living room, my first glance flew to the shelf. The stone head faced forward, its impassive surface greeting me. Vertigo washed over me. Heat prickled the back of my neck. Was my mind fraying? I lifted it, carried it to the low coffee table in the center of the room. Here, I could watch it. I busied myself with coffee, casting frequent furtive glances. It remained still, yet its presence radiated a palpable tension. Days bled into one another, marked by a horrifying new development. The flat, featureless planes on either side of the carved mouth began to change. Thin lines, like hairline cracks, appeared. Subtle at first, they deepened incrementally, etching shallow grooves precisely where eyes should have been. I traced them with a fingertip, felt the rough, raw texture beneath my skin. This wasn't imagination. The carving was altering. Perhaps cheap stone, prone to cracking? No, the lines possessed a disturbing intentionality, curving just so, mimicking the contours of nascent sockets. Denial became a flimsy shield. The soft, grating scrape returned nightly, more insistent now, its source maddeningly elusive. Sometimes I'd burst into the living room, flicking on the light, hoping to catch it mid-motion. It was always still, yet never, I felt certain, in precisely the same position I'd left it. Once, it tilted upwards, as if contemplating the ceiling. Another time, it leaned so perilously forward I marveled it hadn't tumbled. My hands shook whenever I felt compelled to adjust it, the solid weight of the stone mocking the impossibility of its subtle migrations. One evening, the pressure in my chest became unbearable, a physical weight constricting my breath. I paced the confines of my living room like a caged animal. Throwing open the window, I gulped cool night air, seeking relief. The effigy sat on its shelf, the deepening hollows where eyes might form seeming to track my restless movement. Its grin, I swear, stretched wider. Staring at it from across the room, a soundless intrusion pierced my thoughts, not through my ears, but like a spike of pressure directly into my mind, a sibilant whisper, sharp and cold. "Who watches whom?" it hissed. "And how much more can you bear to see?" I recoiled, stumbling backward. My breath came in ragged gasps, hands trembling violently. Was I fracturing? I clamped my eyes shut, pressing palms to my temples, the silence roaring. The whisper did not repeat. When I dared to look again, the effigy's smile seemed honed to a sharper edge, the corners undeniably, impossibly lifted. Drawn by a morbid compulsion, I crossed the room, snatched the stone head from its perch. The urge to hurl it through the open window was overwhelming. I pictured its arc, the satisfying shatter on the pavement below, but a profound paralysis gripped me. My arms felt leaden, useless. Fear, cold and absolute, held me fast. Defeated, I placed it back on the shelf. Retreating to the kitchen, I splashed cold water on my face, the mundane act feeling absurd. Hours passed in a haze of forced distraction. Music played too loud, aimless cleaning. yet my awareness remained tethered to the stone head on the shelf. My own apartment had become a prison, the walls closing in. That night, the whisper returned. As I stood brushing my teeth, a faint sibilance coiled in my hearing, making my ears ring. "Are you certain you are the one in control?" My heart hammered against my ribs. The toothbrush nearly slipped from my grasp. I rinsed, spat, and fled the bathroom, a hunted feeling quickening my steps. By the time I sought my bed, exhaustion warred with raw-wired nerves. Thoughts scattered like startled birds. Lying in the dark, eyes wide, every creak of the building, every distant siren was amplified into a potential threat. Sleep eventually claimed me, a thin and troubled veil. Sometime past midnight, a low, deliberate scrape echoed from the hallway. My eyes snapped open, pulse instantly frantic. I sat bolt upright, straining to hear through the darkness. The scraping persisted, punctuated by a soft, definitive thump. Throwing back the covers, I moved with excruciating slowness towards the bedroom door, easing it open. The living room lay steeped in shadow, save for the weak, ambient glow filtering through the window from the street lamp outside. Enough to limn the furniture, the silhouette of the étagère. The effigy was not on its shelf. Heart pounding, I took hesitant steps into the room, floorboards groaning beneath my weight. My breath hitched. There, on the coffee table, sat the stone head. It faced me, angled slightly upward, its nascent eye sockets aimed at my chest. The corners of its mouth seemed stretched in mocking amusement at my terror. My hand fumbled for the light switch. Under the sudden glare, the changes were stark. The grooves suggesting eyes were deeper now, raw-edged, looking alarmingly close to breaching the surface. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. My gaze dropped to the polished wood of the coffee table. Faint, parallel scratches marred the surface, tracing a path from the edge, drag marks, as if the stone itself had slid across the wood. My legs gave way. I sank onto the sofa, trembling. The evidence was irrefutable. It had moved. It had left traces, and its features, they were undeniably, actively forming. I reached out, compelled, and pressed my fingertips into the deepening ocular hollows. The stone felt rough, jagged, like freshly broken rock. And beneath the chill surface, a faint, inexplicable warmth radiated into my skin. Not heat, precisely, but a disconcerting thrum, a vibration that felt sickeningly alive. My own voice startled me, muttering frantic denials. Not possible, just tired. I set the effigy down on the sofa cushion beside me, watching it with morbid fascination, waiting. Nothing. After a long moment, I rose, resolved. It couldn't stay here. I carried it, heavy and cold, to the hall closet, placing it on the topmost shelf, tucked behind a pair of old boots. I pulled the door shut, the click of the latch loud in the silence. My hands still shook, but a fragile sense of relief washed over me. Back in the living room, I stood listening. Silence. Blessed silence. No scraping, no hissing. The fragile calm emboldened me. I decided to keep vigil on the sofa, just in case. The night crawled by. I watched the slow sweep of the clock hands, listening until my ears rang. Nothing stirred. Around 4, exhaustion claimed me again. I woke stiff-necked near 7, the effigy instantly flooding my thoughts. I scrambled up, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and hurried to the closet. the door remained shut. Reaching for the knob felt like grasping nettles. I pulled it open. The stone head sat exactly where I'd left it, nestled amongst the forgotten footwear. Relief, potent but brief, washed through me, though the air still felt thick with an unseen presence. For several days, it remained entombed in the closet's darkness. Yet, the nights offered no true respite. Faint scraping sounds persisted, seeming to emanate from the hallway near the closet door. Earplugs muffled the sound, but not the feeling. A subtle vibration through the floorboards, the unnerving sense of proximity to something moving. My nerves frayed further with each passing hour. I jumped at the slightest noise. Periodically, steeling myself, I'd check on the effigy. Each time, the lines defining its face seemed starker, the eye hollows deeper, their edges crumbling slightly, as if being meticulously widened from within. And the grin. Always, the grin seemed wider, sharper. Returning home from work became an act of dread. My apartment felt suffocating, the air stale with unseen tension. I began lingering late at the office, finding excuses to visit friends, anything to delay crossing my own threshold. But avoidance was a temporary dam against a rising flood. The moment I stepped inside, I felt its presence, closeted or not. The memory of that internal whisper echoed, a persistent pressure against the walls of my mind, demanding attention. One evening, I saw them. New scratches marring the paint on the hallway wall, mere inches above the baseboard. Faint, parallel lines trailing away from the closet door, heading towards the living room. My breath caught, cold and sharp. I tried rubbing them away, but they were etched into the paint itself, shallow but undeniable grooves. My hands trembled as the image formed, the heavy stone effigy somehow propelling itself along the floor, dragging against the wall. I retreated to the sofa, sinking into the cushions, trying to think, to form a plan. The familiar pressure began to build behind my eyes, the precursor to the whisper. My mouth went dry, my hands clenched into useless fists. I wanted, desperately, to throw the thing out, cast it away. But fear held me hostage. Fear of what might happen, fear it might return, fear of provoking something worse. So I sat, legs trembling, mind racing in frantic circles, trapped between terror and inertia. The presence in the closet felt immense, patient, stronger than my will to act. For now, it waited, hidden in darkness, its half-formed eyes staring blindly outward. And I remained in my living room, staring back at the closed closet door, each beat of my heart a heavy thud in the suffocating silence.